firstly, let's look at an article you published last year, one I really enjoyed around HR 3.0, and I know you did quite a few presentations around the world on that model, and obviously analytics is a big part of it. Can you summarise what you cover in the HR 3.0 article, and particularly the three sort of stage evolution of HR as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe before I go into that, I'll give a bit of context around why I wrote that article. At the time, I'd been attending a lot of different HR events and conferences, and people were talking about people analytics a lot. But I wasn't really hearing a proper explanation or narrative as to why it was important. People were just saying you should be doing it.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was doing a talk at a Santa Fe Institute event, and one of the other speakers there was a fairly well-known economist called Bob Allen from NYU. And he showed some fascinating research, which showed some statistics on earnings and productivity during the original, industrial revolution in Britain in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And then he compared that to the same statistics today. And it really blew me away what he showed, which was that we are in the middle of one of the greatest disruptions in history related to people. And that, together with some research that I saw from the McKinsey Global Institute, which talked about the size of the disruption in terms of automation, and that's going to happen as soon as by the year 2030. I started to realize that this is really what's driving the need for change in human resources.
Yeah.
That to be able to operate effectively in a massively changed environment in the future, HR can't keep operating the way it has been in the past. But I also acknowledge that there has been some movement. So you see, around the time that this disruption started, which was actually in the late 70s, it's been going on a lot longer than people think. We also see that coincides with changes in the HR function. So if you go back to the late 70s, HR was really just a back office function. There's almost no analytics involved, lots of paperwork, lots of process management. If you move to the late 80s and early 90s, we start seeing the beginning of a move towards a much more professionalized HR function. And in particular, more of a service provider to the business. And I labeled that HR 2.0. It was a distinct change in the role of HR. And it started in the late 80s, early 90s, although for some companies it didn't really start happening until we got into the noughties. But that was HR 2.0. But if we look to the future and we see the size of this disruption, because it's only just beginning and nobody knows when it's going to end, that disruption means that HR really have to step up even further. How will we be able to understand, analyze, how will we be able to manage talent in this disrupted world where talent's going to move through businesses much more quickly, where finding people is going to be more challenging, and where retaining them is going to be more challenging. There's going to be some major changes needed to the function to make that happen. And certainly if we keep going in the service provider model, that's really the most common model today, companies are really going to struggle in that future talent world. So the idea behind HR 3.0 is this fairly substantial step up we really need to make to be prepared for that future world of talent.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and I think all of us that have worked in HR, work in HR, we can see that the expectations from the business are certainly changing. A constant charge levelled at HR professionals, and I think this is where people do it from a very generalist level, is they don't necessarily have the business acumen that's required to make that step change to the 3.0 model. How can HR professionals get that business acumen?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's a valid point. I think in my 3.0 model, there were really three fundamental changes to the business that are required. One is much more data-driven, much more analytically driven. A second is that the organization needs to be more agile. So instead of really a swim lane, service line type approach to HR, there needs to be a combination of that with a much more generalist approach to the function. And then third of all, to enable that, you need the broader business acumen, not from everyone, but from a much more substantial number of HR professionals than we have today. So in terms of that, I'd like to be able to say that education programs have caught up with that and are starting to offer ways of developing people in that way, but I don't think it's actually true. And often the education sector tends to take a while to catch up with the enterprise environment and work out what's needed. So there's not a huge amount of opportunities out there for people to take dedicated HR programs or dedicated HR learning that really covers a lot of this new stuff like analytics, like Agile. And so it's really, I think, up to immediate changes are up to two groups of people. I think first of all, the HR professional themselves need to motivate themselves to go out and find that learning. It is there. It's often not on HR programs. It's often in much more general programs. For example, it's very easy to learn about Agile and what Agile means if you go out there and look for it, but you need to actually do that yourself.
Yeah.
you won't be led into it in the way that education is structured currently, I think. But also I think we need HR leaders to be more brave in introducing this stuff to their business. So if you want to have good people analytics, bring in experienced psychometricians and other people that are familiar with analyzing talent and people. If you want to be more agile, bring in some scrum masters, listen to them, help them transform your business to a more agile way of working. And the third part of that is the talent part. You need to start thinking about bringing in individuals who have a broader range of experiences in the business and not just people who are 100% HR experienced. So in order for HR professionals to operate in this environment, they need to have great familiarity with the broader aims of the business. So bringing in individuals that have that broader exposure, not completely replacing existing HR people, just enhancing them with those individuals would be a fairly transformative piece of work. And that's among some of the things that I've been doing in my group and in my function. But I think that's those are some of the things that need to be done. And I think it's dependent on the HR professional themselves and the leaders of the business to really drive that along and make that happen.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.